Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to take a look at 3 great websites for finding music for your podcast. Music is a big part of any podcast. You're going to hear it in intros, you'll hear it in the background sometimes, you'll hear it in pre-recorded ads, you'll hear it used as a transition from one segment to another, and with Spotify upping their game in the podcast space, music playlists can now be featured in Spotify exclusive podcasts too. If you didn't hear about that news, I'll drop a link in the show notes so you can check that out. Music is a big part of life. One of the hardest parts of the pandemic for me has been the lack of live music. Now, it definitely made a comeback in a lot of small venues after the lockdowns faded away, but there's just something indescribable about being in a jam-packed arena, thousands of bands. You just can't replace that feeling. And just like music adds value and fun to your life overall, it's going to add value to your podcast as well. Now, the bulk of your show is going to be vocal, but it's great to work music into your show as well. Now, it's important to choose music that fits the personality of you and your podcast. Think of all the murder mystery podcasts that are out there right now. For whatever reason, whenever I see a podcast in this genre pop up in my podcast app, the Unsolved Mysteries theme immediately starts playing in my head. That's just the connection I make, of course, but that's the power music can play. I'm sure there's a certain song that plays in your mind when a certain genre of a podcast pops up in your app as well. It's all subjective, but it's always cool to think on that level. Now, when I was choosing the theme music for Pod Theory, I was set on this rock track that I discovered on Purple Planet, which is one of the sites I'll tell you about here in a few minutes. But the more I listened to it and thought about it, the music didn't fit the vibe of the show. My purpose with Pod Theory is to be a source of education, information, and inspiration when it comes to your podcast efforts. When I thought of that mindset and put it up against that theme music, something didn't jive. But the music I did choose, at least in my opinion, does. The most important point to remember with adding music to your podcast is to avoid violating copyright laws. You do not want to put yourself in a situation where you have a song or multiple songs on your podcast without the proper license. It's not a question of if you'll get caught using that music, it's a question of when. And when you do, your entire show, not just a particular episode, is going to get taken down. That means months and in some cases even years of hard work right down the drain. And you could even get sued too. It's definitely not worth it. It only makes sense that artists copyright their music and expect to get paid when it's used. I mean, after all, this is how they make a living. Think about it. Would you want someone taking your podcast and featuring it on their podcast or on their videos or their website or whatever medium they choose and then make millions off it and you not see a dime? I think not. Now, fortunately, there are some destinations on the net that you can visit that will help you get music that's safe to use. In some cases, you'll find it for free. In others, you'll need to pay a small fee. And that small fee is nothing compared to some long-term potential legal battle that you could face if you were to violate copyright laws. Now, here are 3 sites that you can look at that are overflowing with great music options that you can make selections for your podcast. Number 1, Purple Planet. I mentioned Purple Planet a minute ago, and I'm a big fan of what they do. They offer a very easy outlet for finding music in dozens of genres to fit the mood, to fit the message, and to fit the personality of your podcast. In return, all they ask is that you credit them for their work. That's a pretty good trade-off. The theme music you heard at the beginning of this episode, and we'll hear another portion of at the end, is from Purple Planet, and I credit them in the show notes of each episode I produce. If you want to take things a step further and use their music for additional purposes, you can. But for podcasting, you just need to be sure to credit the Purple Planet crew for your music selection of choice. Check them out over at purple-planet.com. Number 2, Audio Network. Audio Network has some incredible music options. They even offer you a 10-song trial when you create an account with them. You can peruse dozens of categories to find the right songs for you. And you click on the $ next to each song for licensing information. Pretty simple. You can start sampling thousands of songs before you set up an account too. Go check everything out with them at www.audionetwork.com. And number 3, stockmusic.com. This is another great site with hundreds of options across a number of genres. I haven't personally purchased anything from this site, but I've sampled a lot of tracks that have a great sound. With stockmusic.com, you'll pay for each song individually, and those prices are listed next to each track. You can check out the site for yourself at stockmusic.com. With all these sites, be sure to read the terms and policies so you understand exactly how you can use a particular song in your podcast. I'm going to include links to these 3 sites in the show notes that I mentioned so you can get easy access. And I'm also going to include a link to a great Buzzsprout blog post with more information on this subject and more suggestions for places that you can find music for your podcast. Now, to summarize, I'll say this. When choosing your music, be sure to do it right. Get something that fits your show, something that you really connect with when you hear it, and above all else, something that won't get you into trouble down the road. And that'll conclude today's session of Pod Theory. Hopefully, it was music to your ears. See what I did there? Anyway, if you hate puns but enjoyed the past few minutes we spent together, please tell the world by rating and reviewing Pod Theory on Apple Podcasts. Ratings and reviews go a long, long way towards the growth of any podcast. And if you have a podcast, connect with me on Twitter at Jason Cercone and tell me all about it. I'd love to take a listen to what you're up to and drop you a review as well. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.